Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a time machine. But fair warning, this isn't one of those sparkling, sanitized versions of the past you see in period dramas. Oh no. Tonight, we're plunging deep into the heart of the Middle Ages, a world where the scent of fear and desperation often mingled with the pervasive smells of unwashed bodies, damp earth, and something far more unsettling, the metallic tang of fresh blood and the cloying sweetness of festering wounds. You're about to discover a world so utterly unlike your own, a time when a simple cut could be a death sentence, and where healing was a brutal, often agonizing gamble. Honestly, you probably wouldn't survive a week without a serious infection that would make you wish for a modern emergency room. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The sheer brutality of some surgical procedures, often performed by barber surgeons with limited training, is also worth noting. Without anesthesia or antiseptics, amputations, tumor removals, and other interventions were excruciatingly painful and often led to fatal infections. The tools were crude, and the knowledge of anatomy, while improving, was still far from complete. The screams of the wounded would have been a constant backdrop to life in a medieval city or battlefield. You find yourself standing on a muddy path, the air heavy with the damp chill of a medieval morning. The sounds are a cacophony of distant church bells, the lowing of cattle, and the murmur of human voices. But beneath it all, there's an undercurrent of something less peaceful. This is an era where violence, both accidental and intentional, was a constant companion. Imagine the sheer lack of safety precautions in daily life, sharp tools for farming and crafting, rudimentary construction methods, unpaved roads, and the ever-present threat of conflict. Whether a petty skirmish between local lords or a full-blown war, your modern sensibilities, accustomed to safety regulations and padded corners, would be utterly overwhelmed. It's enough to make you want to wrap yourself in bubble wrap just thinking about it. Think about the psychological impact of living in such a world. Every injury, no matter how small, carried the specter of infection, gangrene, and death. The pain was immense, and the available remedies were often as agonizing as the wound itself. Yet, people persevered, driven by a desperate hope for recovery and a profound trust in the healers, however unorthodox their methods. It's a testament to the human spirit's capacity for endurance in the face of overwhelming adversity. Wounds, therefore, were not an uncommon sight. They were an everyday reality, a common historical fact of life. You'd see them everywhere: a farmer with a deep gash from a clumsy axe stroke, a carpenter with a splintered hand from a rogue piece of timber, a cook with a nasty burn from an open hearth. And these were just the domestic accidents. Step outside the village, and the landscape of injury broadened considerably. Bandits on the roads, feuds between families, and the constant, brutal reality of warfare meant that swords, spears, and arrows were carving their own grim statistics into the population. Every man, woman, and child lived with the very real possibility of sustaining an injury that, even if not immediately fatal, could easily become so. So, as you drift deeper into your peaceful slumber, imagine the vast, unsettling, and often dangerous pharmacopoeia of medieval wound care. From the burning sting of vinegar to the strange poultices, from the belief in laudable pews to the magic of healing weapons, the pursuit of recovery was a desperate and often misguided endeavor. It's a profound reminder of the incredible progress humanity has made, and how truly fortunate we are to live in a time of scientific medicine, where a simple cut is no longer a roll of the dice with death. The immediate aftermath of a wound was a terrifying ordeal. There were no paramedics, no sterile bandages, no pain medication beyond perhaps a swig of strong ale. The first response was often crude and desperate. You might see someone trying to staunch a bleeding wound with a dirty rag, or applying a poultice made from whatever local herbs were believed to have healing properties. The pain would be excruciating, a raw, throbbing agony that would make you cry out. But there was little relief to be found. And then came the waiting, the agonizing uncertainty of whether the wound would simply heal, or if the unseen enemy would begin its insidious work. Now, let's shift our focus from the bizarre remedies themselves to the very human process of observation that led to such peculiar conclusions about wound healing in the Middle Ages. You're standing, perhaps in a medieval infirmary, watching a healer tend to a patient with a festering wound. Without microscopes, without germ theory, without sophisticated diagnostic tools. How did people arrive at their understanding of wound progression and their supposed cures? The answer lies in their interpretation of what they could see and how they connected those observations to their existing medical framework. That unseen enemy, and of course, was infection. In the Middle Ages, the concept of microorganisms, bacteria, viruses was completely unknown. They didn't understand that tiny, invisible creatures could invade a wound, fester, and ultimately lead to fever, gangrene, and death. Instead, infection was often attributed to bad humors accumulating in the wound, or to corrupted air miasmas entering the body through the break in the skin. The pus that oozed from an infected wound wasn't seen as a sign of bacterial activity. It was seen as corrupt matter, or peccant humors, being expelled by the body, a sign that the body was trying to cleanse itself. It's like thinking your overflowing toilet is a sign of your house trying to clean itself, rather than a plumbing disaster. Imagine a common historical fact, the visible signs of a wound's progression. You'd observe a fresh cut, perhaps bleeding profusely. Over days, it might become red, swollen, and hot to the touch. Then, pus might begin to form, sometimes thick and white, other times thin and discolored. Finally, if the patient survived, the wound would slowly close and scar. To your modern mind, these are classic signs of inflammation, bacterial infection, and eventual healing. But to a medieval observer, these signs were interpreted through the lens of humoral theory and miasmas. This fundamental misunderstanding of infection meant that wound care was often counterproductive. Practices that we now know are vital for preventing infection. Sterilization, cleanliness, aseptic technique were completely absent. Surgeons, or more commonly, barber surgeons, who often had limited medical training, might use the same unwashed tools on multiple patients, inadvertently spreading infection from one to another. Bandages, if used, were often made from unwashed cloth, further introducing contaminants into an open wound. It was a grim cycle, where the very attempts at healing often exacerbated the problem. The redness and heat around a wound, for instance, would be attributed to an excess of hot humors, particularly blood or yellow bile, accumulating in the area. The swelling might be seen as a buildup of phlegm, and the pus, as we've discussed, was often interpreted as laudable pus, a sign that the body was successfully expelling corrupt matter. They saw a correlation. Pus often preceded healing if the patient survived, and concluded that pus was a necessary part of the healing process, rather than a byproduct of the immune system fighting infection. It's like watching a building being demolished and thinking the dust and debris are essential for its reconstruction. Now, for a unique and lesser-known detail about wound care in the Middle Ages, did you know that some medieval healers believed that a wound needed to suppurate, that is, produce pus, in order to heal properly? This was based on the observation that wounds that produced pus sometimes eventually healed, while those that didn't might lead to a more rapid and often fatal systemic infection. They misinterpreted the pus, which is often a sign of the body's immune response, fighting bacteria, as a necessary part of the cleansing process, a sign that the bad humors were being expelled. So, instead of trying to prevent pus, they sometimes actively encouraged it, which, as you can imagine, was not exactly a recipe for quick recovery. It's like thinking your car needs to leak oil to run properly. This misinterpretation of observable phenomena is a crucial element in understanding their flawed logic. They were keen observers, but their interpretations were fundamentally limited by the scientific knowledge of their era. They couldn't see the bacteria, so they attributed the changes to the humors or to bad air entering the wound. This leads us to a fascinating point of academic debate. Historians still debate the extent to which medieval practitioners genuinely believed in the beneficial nature of pus, or if it was a pragmatic rationalization of an unavoidable and poorly understood phenomenon. Was it a sincere medical theory, or a desperate attempt to find meaning in a process they couldn't control? The truth likely lies somewhere in between, a blend of observation and the limitations of their knowledge. Now, for a unique and lesser-known detail about medieval wound observation, did you know that some healers would meticulously examine the smell of a wound as a diagnostic tool? A sweet, cloying odor might be interpreted differently than a sharp, putrid one. each suggesting a particular humoral imbalance or type of corruption. While modern medicine also notes wound odor, their interpretations were tied to miasmatic beliefs rather than specific bacterial strains. Imagine a doctor sniffing your wound and giving you a detailed humoral diagnosis based on the aroma. It adds a whole new and rather unpleasant dimension to a checkup. The pain, of course, was immense. There were no effective anesthetics. Surgery, when performed, was a brutal, agonizing ordeal. Patients might be given alcohol or opium to dull the senses, but the relief would be minimal. The screams of the wounded would echo through the makeshift infirmaries, a constant reminder of the raw, visceral reality of medieval medicine. It's enough to make you grateful for even the smallest cut today. Knowing you have access to antiseptic wipes and pain relievers, this leads us to a fascinating point of academic debate. Historians still debate the extent to which these sensory observations like smell and appearance of pus were genuinely useful diagnostic indicators within their limited framework, or if they were primarily subjective interpretations that reinforced existing beliefs. Was there a practical wisdom embedded in these observations, or were they largely a form of medical divination? The answer likely varies, but it highlights the ingenuity of people trying to make sense of complex biological processes without modern tools. The psychological toll of living in such a world, where a simple scratch could lead to a slow, agonizing death, must have been immense. Every wound carried with it the specter of infection, the fear of losing a limb, or worse, losing your life. This pervasive anxiety drove people to seek out any remedy, no matter how strange or painful, that offered even a glimmer of hope. And it is into this desperate landscape that a common household liquid, one that you probably have in your pantry right now, stepped forward as a surprising and brutally applied agent of healing vinegar. Its sharp tang, its acidic bite, would soon become a familiar, if agonizing, sensation on the open wounds of the medieval world. Consider the power of anecdotal evidence and the placebo effect. If a patient with a festering wound was treated with vinegar or a strange poultice, and their wound eventually healed as some would, due to the body's own immune system, the recovery would naturally be attributed to the remedy. This created a positive feedback loop the remedy seemed to work, so it was used again, reinforcing the belief in its efficacy. Without controlled studies or a scientific understanding of disease progression, it was impossible to discern which remedies, if any, were truly effective. It's like believing a rain dance works because it eventually rains, even if it was going to rain anyway. Now, let's peel back another layer of medieval medical thought, moving from the grim reality of wounds to the underlying intellectual framework that governed all understanding of health and disease, the theory of the four humors. You're stepping into the mind of a medieval physician, perhaps a scholar poring over ancient texts in a monastery, or a university-trained doctor in a bustling city. For them, every ailment, every injury, every fever was a direct manifestation of an imbalance within the body's vital fluids. The lack of understanding about microorganisms meant that they couldn't see the true cause of infection. They couldn't see the staphylococcus or streptococcus. So they relied on what was visible, the symptoms themselves, the environmental conditions, and the general state of the patient's humors. Their observations were keen, but their interpretations were fundamentally limited by the scientific knowledge of their era. Imagine your body as a microcosm, a miniature universe reflecting the larger cosmos. This is the common historical fact of humoral theory, a system inherited from ancient Greek and Roman thinkers like Hippocrates and Galen, and meticulously preserved and elaborated upon throughout the Middle Ages. Your very essence, your health, your personality, and your susceptibility to illness were all dictated by the precise balance of four fundamental fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile or choler, and black bile or melancholy. Each humor had its own set of qualities. Blood was hot and wet, phlegm cold and wet, yellow bile hot and dry, and black bile cold and dry. Perfect health was a rare and fleeting state of perfect equilibrium. Think about the psychological comfort this provided. In a world where illness and injury were constant threats and often fatal, having a coherent system to explain them, even a flawed one, offered a sense of order and predictability. The idea that you could influence the healing process by balancing your humors, or by cleansing the wound with substances like vinegar, gave people a sense of agency in the face of overwhelming vulnerability. It was better to have a wrong explanation than no explanation at all. So, when you sustained a wound, whether it was a simple cut or a gaping battle injury, it wasn't just a physical breach of the skin. Oh no, it was immediately interpreted through the lens of humoral theory. The bleeding, the inflammation, the pain, and especially the eventual pus were all seen as signs of the humors reacting, or more likely, becoming imbalanced. A wound was a disruption, and the body's response was an attempt to restore balance, often by expelling what was considered corrupt or excessive. It's like thinking your car's engine light coming on means the car is trying to tell you a philosophical truth about its existence, rather than just needing an oil change. This reliance on direct sensory observation, without the aid of advanced instrumentation, is a common historical fact across many ancient and pre-modern medical systems. From examining the pulse to observing the color of urine, physicians and healers used all their available senses to gather information about a patient's condition. The wound, with its visible signs of inflammation and discharge, provided ample material for such observations, leading to the intricate, yet ultimately incorrect, theories and remedies we've explored. For instance, a wound that bled profusely might be seen as an excess of blood, a plethora, which needed to be reduced. Inflammation around a wound, characterized by heat and redness, would be attributed to an excess of hot humors, like blood or yellow bile. And the pus, that viscous, often foul-smelling discharge we discussed earlier, was considered peccant humor, or corrupt matter, being actively expelled by the body's natural healing process. They believed the body was literally trying to push out the bad stuff, and pus was the visible proof of this internal cleansing. So, as you drift deeper into your peaceful slumber, imagine the diligent, yet ultimately misguided efforts of medieval observers. They were trying to make sense of a world teeming with unseen threats, using the tools and knowledge available to them. And in their earnest attempts to decipher the mysteries of wound healing, they saw patterns in the most obvious of places, transforming everyday symptoms into complex humoral dramas. It's a profound reminder of the journey of human knowledge, from the visible and misinterpreted to the invisible and understood. This fundamental understanding meant that the goal of wound treatment wasn't just to close the skin or prevent infection, a concept they didn't have. It was to assist the body in restoring humoral balance and expelling the bad humors. This led to practices that, to our modern minds, seem utterly counterproductive. For example, if a wound was inflamed, they might apply cooling agents to reduce the heat, or even perform bloodletting nearby to draw off the excess blood. If pus was forming, they might encourage it, seeing it as a sign of proper healing. Now, let's consider the social and economic realities of the Middle Ages that made such brutal and often strange wound treatments, including the widespread use of vinegar. Not just theoretically plausible, but also incredibly prevalent. You're stepping into the daily lives of ordinary people, far removed from the scholarly debates of university-trained physicians. Here, practicality, affordability, and inherited wisdom often trumped formal medical theory, leading to a diverse and often desperate array of self-care practices. Now, for a unique and lesser-known detail about humoral theory and wounds, did you know that the location of a wound on the body was often linked to specific humors and their corresponding organs? A wound on the head, for instance, might be seen as affecting the phlegm, as the brain was considered a cold and wet organ associated with phlegm. A wound on the liver area associated with yellow bile might be treated differently than one on the spleen associated with black bile. This added another layer of complexity to diagnosis and treatment, where the physical geography of the injury was interpreted through a humoral map of the body. It's like having a different user manual for every single button on your remote control. Imagine the average medieval household. Life was hard, often precarious, and injuries were a constant threat. Most people were engaged in manual labor, farming, crafting, building, activities that carried a high risk of cuts, breaks, and burns. Illness or injury meant lost work, and lost work meant lost income, which could quickly lead to starvation for a family. The common historical fact is that formal medical care from a learned physician was a luxury accessible only to the wealthy elite. For the vast majority, such services were prohibitively expensive, and often physically inaccessible in rural areas where most people lived. This leads us to a fascinating point of academic debate. Historians still debate the extent to which medieval physicians truly believed in the precise, almost mathematical balance of humors, or if it was a flexible framework that allowed for a great deal of interpretation and adaptation based on individual cases. Was it a rigid dogma or a guiding principle that allowed for practical improvisation? The answer likely lies in the diverse practices and writings of the era. So, when a wound occurred, people couldn't simply rush to an emergency room or pick up sterile bandages and antiseptic cream from a pharmacy. They relied on what was immediately available, affordable, and familiar. This meant turning to local healers, the village wise woman, the barber surgeon who often had limited training and performed a variety of tasks from hair cutting to tooth extraction and basic surgery, or most commonly, the accumulated knowledge within their own families and communities. Grandmothers, mothers, and experienced neighbors were often the primary caregivers, passing down remedies and practices through generations. It's like your family's secret recipe for a cold. But for a gaping wound, the idea of concoction was also vital in wound healing. This was the process by which the body was believed to cook or ripen the raw humors or corrupted matter into a form that could be expelled as pus. Remedies were often aimed at aiding this concoction, making the pus thicker or whiter, which was seen as a sign of healthy suppuration. A clear, watery discharge was often considered a bad sign, indicating that the humors were not being properly concocted. In this context, the accessibility of vinegar was paramount. As we discussed, it was a byproduct of everyday life, produced from fermented wine or cider, making it cheap and widely available. Unlike rare herbs imported from distant lands or precious minerals, vinegar required no special cultivation or mining. It was quite literally a household staple. This democratic nature of the remedy meant that it wasn't just for the wealthy. The common peasant or soldier could also access its perceived healing benefits. It's like having a universal, cheap, and painful antiseptic in every pantry. Pain itself was also interpreted through the humoral lens. Sharp. Throbbing pain might be seen as an excess of hot humors, while a dull aching pain might suggest an excess of cold humors. This influenced the choice of remedies, with hot applications for cold pain and cooling applications for hot pain. It was a constant effort to counteract the qualities of the humors, even in the face of agonizing physical suffering. Now, for a unique and lesser-known detail about the social aspect of medieval wound care, did you know that in some communities, particularly among soldiers or in times of plague, there was a practice of vinegar men, or plague doctors, who would carry strong vinegar solutions? Not just for personal protection, believing it would ward off miasmas, but also to rinse coins, hands, and even to dab on the skin of the sick. While not directly for wound healing, it shows the widespread trust in vinegar's cleansing and purifying properties, extending even to public health measures in desperate times. Imagine someone walking around with a giant bottle of vinegar, splashing it on everything, hoping to ward off disease. The psychological impact of this system on the wounded patient must have been profound. You weren't just suffering from a physical injury, your very internal balance was disrupted. The treatments, often painful and seemingly counterintuitive, were presented as necessary steps to restore this balance. There was a sense of cosmic order to the suffering, a belief that your body was fighting to return to its natural state, even if that fight involved excruciating interventions. This leads us to a fascinating point of academic debate. Historians still debate the precise balance between practical necessity and genuine belief in the efficacy of these folk remedies. Did people use vinegar on wounds simply because they had no other choice? Or did they genuinely believe in its curative powers, even when it yielded inconsistent and often agonizing results? The answer likely varies from individual to individual and community to community, reflecting the complex interplay of desperation, tradition, and hope. So, as you drift deeper into your peaceful slumber, imagine the intricate web of belief that governed health and healing in the Middle Ages. The simple act of sustaining a wound was transformed into a complex humoral drama, where every drop of blood, every beat of pus, and every surge of pain was a message from your internal landscape. Understanding this framework is crucial to grasping why people turned to the remedies they did, no matter how strange or brutal they might seem to us now. It's a profound reminder of how deeply ingrained scientific paradigms can be, and how utterly different the world looked through the lens of ancient wisdom. The social acceptance of pain also played a crucial role. In a world where life was often brutal and short, and medical procedures were inherently agonizing, enduring pain was often seen as a sign of fortitude and a necessary part of the healing process. The searing pain of vinegar on an open wound, while horrific to us, might have been interpreted as a sign that the remedy was working, that it was actively cutting through the corruption. It was a grim comfort, but comfort nonetheless. Now, let's shift our focus from the abstract theories of humors to the very tangible, often terrifying reality of infection in the Middle Ages. You're standing beside a wounded soldier, perhaps or a peasant with a deep cut from a farming accident. The wound, initially just a break in the skin, is now showing alarming signs: redness, swelling, heat, and a throbbing pain. To your modern mind, these are classic indicators of bacterial infection. But to a medieval observer lacking any concept of microorganisms, this was a mysterious and often fatal process, an unseen enemy at work. The psychological comfort provided by these practices cannot be overstated. When you're watching a loved one suffer from a wound that could easily turn fatal, the act of doing something, however painful or ineffective, offered a sense of agency and hope. The ritual of preparing and applying the vinegar, the belief that you were actively combating the illness, could provide solace to both the patient and the caregiver. It was a way to feel proactive in the face of overwhelming vulnerability, to demonstrate care, and to maintain a semblance of control in an unpredictable world. Imagine the sheer helplessness in the face of infection. A common historical fact is that people in the Middle Ages had no understanding of bacteria or viruses. They didn't know that tiny, invisible living things could enter a wound and multiply, producing toxins that caused fever, chills, and ultimately, systemic illness. The air itself was often seen as the culprit, carrying miasmas, noxious fumes, or corrupted atmospheric qualities that could enter the body through the wound and cause it to fester. The wound wasn't being invaded by germs, it was being tainted by bad air or internal corruption. It's like trying to fix a computer virus by opening a window to let out the bad internet air. Furthermore, the lack of effective alternatives meant that people had very little basis for comparison. If a wound was treated with vinegar, and it eventually healed as some would, due to the body's own immune system, the recovery would naturally be attributed to the vinegar. This created a self-reinforcing cycle of anecdotal evidence, ensuring that many traditional practices endured for centuries, despite their lack of true scientific merit. This fundamental misunderstanding meant that their attempts to combat infection were often futile, or even harmful. They couldn't sterilize instruments because they didn't know why it was necessary. They couldn't wash their hands with soap and water to prevent transmission because they didn't know about hand hygiene in the germ theory sense. The very practices intended to cleanse a wound, such as washing it with unboiled water or applying unsterile poultices, often introduced more contaminants, exacerbating the infection. It was a grim irony, where the desire to heal often led to further suffering. So, as you drift deeper into your peaceful slumber, imagine the resilience and resourcefulness of ordinary people in the Middle Ages, faced with the constant threat of injury and the limitations of formal medicine. They turned to their own ingenuity, their communities, and the accumulated wisdom of generations. Their first aid, however brutal it may seem to us, was born from a deep human desire to alleviate suffering and find comfort in a challenging world. A testament to the enduring spirit of self-preservation. The pus, that telltale sign of infection, was interpreted in a particularly peculiar way. As we discussed earlier, some believed that a wound needed to suppurate, to produce pus, in order to heal properly. This was a unique and lesser-known detail. They saw pus as laudable pus, or good pus, a sign that the body was actively expelling the corrupt matter, or peccant humors that were causing the illness. A wound that didn't produce pus, or produced a thin, watery discharge, might actually be considered a worse sign, indicating that the body wasn't effectively cleansing itself. So, instead of trying to prevent pus, they sometimes actively encouraged it, or at least tolerated its presence, believing it was a necessary step towards recovery. Imagine celebrating your car leaking oil because it means the engine is cleansing itself. Now, as our journey through the Middle Ages draws towards its close, let's turn our attention to the slow, almost imperceptible shifts in scientific thought that would eventually challenge the very foundations of these ancient medical beliefs about wound healing. You're standing on the cusp of a new era, a time when curious minds, armed with nascent tools and a growing skepticism, began to question the established order. It wasn't a sudden revolution, but a gradual awakening, a quiet turning of the tide that would eventually sweep away centuries of humoral theory and its peculiar remedies. This leads us to a fascinating point of academic debate. Historians still debate the precise origins of the laudable pus theory. Was it a direct misinterpretation of the body's immune response, where pus can indicate the immune system fighting off infection? Or was it a more pragmatic rationalization of an unavoidable reality in an era without antibiotics? The answer likely involves a complex interplay of observation, limited knowledge, and the human desire to find meaning in suffering. Imagine the intellectual landscape of the late Middle Ages and the early Renaissance. The common historical fact is that the scientific method, as we understand it today, was still rudimentary. Knowledge was often derived from ancient texts, philosophical reasoning, and anecdotal observation, rather than systematic experimentation. Physicians were often more philosophers than scientists, debating the nature of humors and their influence on the body. But beneath this established surface, cracks were beginning to appear. The progression of an untreated infection was a terrifying spectacle. The redness would spread, the swelling would increase, and the pain would intensify. Then might come the fever, the chills, the delirium, signs that the infection was spreading throughout the body, leading to what we now call sepsis. Without antibiotics, the body's own immune system was often overwhelmed, and death was a common outcome. Gangrene. The putrefaction of tissue was another horrifying possibility, often leading to amputation performed without anesthesia or sterile conditions as a last, desperate resort. One of the most significant, yet initially overlooked, developments was the growing emphasis on anatomical study. While Galen's ancient texts still held sway, figures like Mondino de Luzzi in the 14th century, and later the great Renaissance anatomists like Leonardo da Vinci and Andreas Vesalius, though slightly later than our core Middle Ages period, their work built on earlier foundations began to perform more frequent and detailed dissections of human bodies. This was a unique and lesser-known detail that, while not directly related to germ theory, fostered a new spirit of empirical observation and a more accurate understanding of the body's structure. If you could see the actual organs and how they were connected, it became harder to believe in abstract humors flowing freely without physical channels. It's like finally opening up the hood of a car and seeing the actual engine, rather than just reading a theoretical manual. Think about the psychological impact of this unseen enemy. You could literally feel your body betraying you, growing hot, swelling, and oozing, with no understanding of why. The fear would be immense, a constant companion to the physical agony. People would turn to prayer, to charms, to any remedy, no matter how outlandish, in a desperate attempt to combat this invisible, relentless foe. The lack of control, the sheer mystery of it all, must have been profoundly unsettling. The ability to directly observe and map the human body didn't immediately translate into an understanding of microscopic disease agents or infection. Germ theory was still centuries away. However, it did encourage a more mechanistic view of the body, seeing it as a complex system of interconnected parts, rather than just a vessel for humors. This shift, though gradual, laid the groundwork for future medical advancements, moving away from purely philosophical explanations towards a more tangible, observable reality. The environment itself contributed significantly to the problem. Unsanitary living conditions, lack of clean water, and poor personal hygiene meant that bacteria were ubiquitous. Open sewers, uncollected waste, and crowded living spaces provided fertile breeding grounds for pathogens. A wound, even a minor one, was immediately exposed to a multitude of potential invaders, making infection almost inevitable. It's like trying to keep a wound clean in a mud pit. The odds are stacked against you. This leads us to a fascinating point of academic debate. Historians still debate the precise influence of early anatomical studies on the decline of humoral theory in wound care. While anatomists clearly challenged Galen's anatomical descriptions, the humoral framework for understanding disease and healing persisted for a long time. Was it a direct causal link, or simply one of many factors contributing to a broader intellectual shift? The interplay is complex, with inertia and tradition playing significant roles in the slow adoption of new ideas. So, as you drift deeper into your peaceful slumber, imagine the terrifying reality of infection in the Middle Ages. The unseen enemy, bacteria, wreaked havoc on the wounded, transforming simple injuries into life-threatening crises. Without germ theory, without antibiotics, people were left to interpret the signs of infection through the flawed lens of humoral theory and miasmas, leading to practices that, while well-intentioned, often added to the suffering. It's a profound reminder of how truly vulnerable humanity was, and how miraculous our modern understanding of disease truly is. Parallel to anatomical studies, there was a nascent interest in surgical innovation, often driven by the harsh realities of warfare. Military surgeons facing gruesome injuries on the battlefield were often more pragmatic and less bound by traditional theory than their academic counterparts. Figures like Henri de Mondeville in the 14th century began to advocate for more rational wound care, including the importance of cleanliness and avoiding excessive use of harsh irritants. While still far from modern aseptic techniques, these were early whispers of a different approach, emphasizing practical outcomes over theoretical purity. It's like a mechanic experimenting with different tools to fix an engine, even if they don't fully understand the physics behind it. Now, let's trace the remarkable history of a seemingly simple liquid vinegar. You're stepping back in time even further than the Middle Ages, delving into the ancient world, where the properties of this acidic solution were recognized and utilized long before the medieval period. Its journey through medical history is a testament to its enduring, albeit often misunderstood, utility. The increasing exchange of ideas across Europe, facilitated by the nascent printing press which became widespread in the late 15th century, also played a crucial role. New medical texts, often challenging traditional views or presenting new observations, could be disseminated more widely and quickly than ever before. This allowed for a more rapid spread of new ideas, even if they were initially met with skepticism or resistance. It's like the early days of the internet, where information started to flow more freely. Even if not all of it was accurate or immediately accepted. Imagine the earliest human settlements, where fermentation was a natural, if accidental, process. Grapes left too long, wine exposed to air, these would inevitably turn sour, transforming into vinegar. This common historical fact of its natural creation meant that vinegar was widely available across many ancient cultures, from the Egyptians and Greeks to the Romans and beyond. It wasn't a rare or exotic substance. It was a byproduct of everyday life, a liquid born from the very staples of their diet. Think about the gradual shift in language. While physicians would still speak of humors for a long time, you start to see more detailed descriptions of symptoms and wound progression based on observable phenomena, rather than just abstract imbalances. Medical texts began to incorporate more empirical observations, even if the underlying interpretations were still rooted in humoral theory. It was a slow, incremental change, like watching a river gradually change its course, almost imperceptible day by day, but profoundly transformative over decades. The ancient Greeks, particularly Hippocrates, the father of medicine, were among the first to systematically document the medicinal uses of vinegar. They recognized its astringent properties, its ability to clean, and its sharp, penetrating quality. Hippocrates himself, whose writings formed the bedrock of medieval medical thought, remember that callback? Prescribed oxymel, a mixture of vinegar and honey, for various ailments, including respiratory issues and digestive complaints. For wounds, he recommended washing them with vinegar or diluted wine. This was not based on germ theory, of course, but on empirical observation of its cleansing effects. It's like using a strong cleaning solution because it looks clean, even if you don't understand the chemistry. The growing skepticism towards pure authority, fueled by intellectual movements like humanism, also contributed to this shift. Scholars began to re-examine ancient texts critically, or rather than simply accepting them as infallible. This encouraged a spirit of inquiry and a willingness to challenge long-held beliefs, even those endorsed by revered figures like Galen. This intellectual ferment created fertile ground for new ideas to emerge, however slowly, and eventually, for the brutal yet well-intentioned. Practices like pouring vinegar on wounds to be re-evaluated, The Romans, ever pragmatic, adopted and expanded upon the Greek uses of vinegar. Roman soldiers, a common historical fact, famously carried pasca, a mixture of vinegar and water, as their daily drink. This wasn't just for hydration. The acidity of the vinegar helped to purify questionable water sources, making it safer to drink and potentially preventing dysentery. For wounds, they would use vinegar to clean injuries on the battlefield, recognizing its ability to wash away dirt and debris, and perhaps to reduce the foul odors associated with festering wounds. Its sharp bite was seen as a sign of its potency, its ability to cut through corruption. So, as you settle deeper into your peaceful slumber, imagine the quiet hum of intellectual curiosity in the Middle Ages. It was a time when the world was still largely mysterious, and disease a terrifying enigma. Yet, within this uncertainty, brave minds began to look closer, to question old truths, and to seek new explanations. The burgeoning interest in anatomy, the pragmatic innovations in surgery, and the broader spirit of inquiry all contributed to a slow but irreversible shift away from the bizarre remedies of the past, paving the way for a future where the true culprits of infection would finally be revealed. It's a testament to the enduring human drive to understand, to innovate, and to ultimately heal. Now, for a unique and lesser-known detail about vinegar's ancient lineage. Did you know that some ancient texts suggest vinegar was used not just for cleaning wounds, but also as a mild anesthetic, or a way to induce unconsciousness during painful procedures? While certainly not a true anesthetic by modern standards, the shock of its application to an open wound, combined with its strong smell and taste if ingested, might have caused a temporary distraction or even a brief fainting spell, which would have been seen as beneficial during a brutal operation. Imagine being told to drink a cup of vinegar before having a tooth pulled, a truly unpleasant, but perhaps effective, distraction. And so, we arrive at the final chapter of our journey, looking back at the echoes of a bygone era and marveling at the incredible distance humanity has traveled in its quest for healing. You're now back in your own time, surrounded by the comforts and certainties of modern medicine, but with a newfound appreciation for the struggles and beliefs of those who came before. The Middle Ages, with its brutal wound treatments and peculiar logic, might seem like a distant, almost alien world. But it was a crucial stepping stone in the relentless march of human understanding. This leads us to a fascinating point of academic debate. Historians still debate the precise mechanisms by which ancient and medieval practitioners believed vinegar worked on wounds. Was it primarily its cleansing action, its perceived drying or cooling humoral qualities, or a more mystical belief in its purifying power? The answer likely varies depending on the specific cultural context and the individual practitioner's philosophical leanings. Imagine comparing the medieval infirmary, dimly lit and filled with the groans of the injured, to a modern operating room. The contrast is stark. The common historical fact is that life expectancy in the Middle Ages was dramatically lower than today, often hovering around 30-35 years, with high mortality rates from injuries and infections. A simple cut, which today might warrant a quick clean and a bandage, could then lead to agonizing pain, fever, gangrene, and ultimately, death. The fear of injury and its consequences was pervasive, a constant shadow over daily life. Throughout antiquity and into the early Middle Ages, vinegar maintained its reputation as a versatile and accessible medicinal agent. Its acidic nature, while painful on an open wound, was seen as a positive attribute. It was believed to dry excessive moisture, cut through putrefaction, and cleanse the affected area. These properties aligned well with the humoral theory, where excess wetness or corruption needed to be expelled or neutralized. It was a tool that fit neatly into their existing medical framework. Today, you benefit from centuries of accumulated knowledge, from the germ theory of disease to advanced surgical techniques and sophisticated antibiotics. You understand that bacteria, invisible to the naked eye, are the true culprits behind wound infections, not imbalances of humors or malevolent miasmas. You trust in sterile environments, in evidence-based medicine, and in the power of antibiotics to combat infections that once decimated populations. It's like upgrading from a crude stone tool to a laser-guided surgical instrument. The fundamental purpose is the same, but the technology and precision are light years apart. The accessibility of vinegar was also a key factor in its enduring popularity. Unlike rare herbs or precious minerals, vinegar could be produced locally from wine, beer, or even fruit, making it affordable and readily available to all social classes. This democratic nature of the remedy meant that it wasn't just for the wealthy. The common soldier or peasant could also access its perceived healing benefits. It's like having a universal, cheap, and slightly painful antiseptic in every household. The journey from pouring agonizing vinegar on open wounds to performing intricate microsurgery is a testament to the insatiable human curiosity and the power of scientific inquiry. It wasn't a straight line, but a winding path filled with missteps, dead ends, and brilliant breakthroughs. Each peculiar remedy, each flawed theory, was a piece of the puzzle, a step towards a more accurate understanding of the human body and the world around it. So, as you slowly drift into a deeper state of relaxation, envision the long, rich history of vinegar in medicine. From the battlefields of ancient Rome to the humble homes of the Middle Ages, this acidic liquid has been a constant companion in the human struggle against injury and disease. Its brutal application to open wounds, while agonizing, was rooted in centuries of observation and a desperate desire to heal. It's a profound reminder that even the simplest substances can hold complex histories, and that humanity's quest for well-being has always been a journey of experimentation, sometimes painful, but always persistent. Now, for a unique and lesser-known detail, did you know that even after the Middle Ages, well into the Renaissance and early modern period, the debate over laudable pus and the best way to treat wounds continued fiercely among surgeons? Some, like Ambroise Paré in the 16th century, famously challenged the practice of cauterization and promoted more gentle wound care. But these new ideas often faced strong resistance from traditionalists. It highlights how deeply ingrained these beliefs were, and how much effort it took to dislodge them, even when more effective alternatives began to emerge. Now, let's confront the brutal reality of vinegar's application to wounds in the Middle Ages. You're no longer just observing, you're a patient. Perhaps a knight with a sword cut on your arm, or a villager with a deep gash from a farming tool. The wound is raw, bleeding, and agonizingly painful. And then, the healer approaches, not with a gentle touch, but with a flask of sharp, pungent liquid. This leads us to a fascinating point of academic debate. Historians still debate the precise moment or discovery that truly broke the dominance of humoral theory in wound care and paved the way for modern surgical practices. Was it the anatomical revelations, the pragmatic innovations of military surgeons, or the eventual articulation of germ theory? It was likely a complex interplay of many factors, a cumulative effect that slowly but surely transformed medical understanding. Imagine the scene of a makeshift infirmary, perhaps a tent on a battlefield, or a corner of a smoky cottage. The air is thick with the groans of the injured and the metallic scent of blood. You lie there, your body screaming in protest, as the healer prepares their tools. There are no sterile gloves, no antiseptic sprays, just a bowl of water, likely unboiled, some rough linen rags, and a bottle of vinegar. The common historical fact is that vinegar was poured directly onto open wounds, often without dilution, and sometimes even warmed for what was believed to be better efficacy. The sheer thought of it makes you wince, doesn't it? Think about the psychological shift, from a world where injury and illness were often seen as a punishment from God, or a mystical imbalance, to a world where they're understood as biological processes that can be studied, diagnosed, and treated with precision. This shift has not only extended human lifespans, but also fundamentally changed our relationship with our own bodies and the concept of health itself. You no longer live in constant fear of a simple cut. You live with the knowledge that many injuries can be healed. The moment the vinegar touches your raw flesh, a searing, agonizing pain explodes through your body. It's a burning, stinging sensation, far more intense than the initial injury. You might cry out, clench your teeth, or writhe in agony. The acetic acid in the vinegar, while possessing some mild antiseptic properties unknown to them, would mercilessly irritate the exposed nerve endings. It's like pouring lemon juice on a paper cut, but magnified 100-fold, across a much larger, deeper wound. The pain would be immediate, visceral, and utterly overwhelming. The story of medieval wound care, with its reliance on humors and its brutal application of vinegar, is not just a historical curiosity. It's a powerful reminder of the human condition, our vulnerability to injury, our desperate search for relief, and our remarkable capacity to learn and adapt. It shows us that even in the darkest corners of ignorance, there was a genuine desire to heal, a profound human instinct to alleviate suffering. The purpose of this brutal application in their minds was multifaceted. Firstly, it was seen as a powerful cleansing agent. The sharp acidity was believed to cut through any putrefaction or corrupt matter in the wound, literally washing away the perceived source of infection. Secondly, it was thought to dry the wound, counteracting the wetness associated with excess phlegm or other humors. A dry wound, in their view, was a healthy wound, less prone to the accumulation of bad humors. Thirdly, its astringent properties were believed to help staunch bleeding and tighten the tissues, promoting closure. And as you reflect on this journey, remember that the pursuit of knowledge is never truly finished. Just as the medieval thinkers began to chip away at ancient beliefs, so too do we continue to refine our understanding of health and disease. What seems cutting edge today might be a quaint historical footnote centuries from now. It's a humbling thought, isn't it? Now, for a unique and lesser-known detail about the application of vinegar, did you know that sometimes, after pouring vinegar onto a wound, healers would then apply a hot iron or cauterize the wound? This was done to further dry the wound and to stop bleeding. But the combination of vinegar and searing heat would have been an unimaginable torment. The belief was that the heat would further purify and seal the wound, preventing the entry of miasmas or the escape of vital humors. Imagine enduring that level of pain, not just once, but perhaps repeatedly, in the desperate hope of healing. So, as the last whispers of the Middle Ages fade into the quiet of your room, and you settle into a deep, restorative sleep, carry with you the echoes of a time when healing was a brutal art, and where even the sharp tang of vinegar symbolized a desperate, yet enduring, hope. And so we come to the final chapter of our journey, looking back at the echoes of a bygone era and marveling at the incredible distance humanity has traveled in its quest for healing. You have now returned to your own time, surrounded by the comforts and certainties of modern medicine, but with a new appreciation for the struggles and beliefs of those who came before you. The Middle Ages, with their brutal wound treatments and strange logic, may seem like a distant, almost alien world, but it was a crucial stepping stone in the relentless advance of human understanding. This leads us to a fascinating point of academic debate. Historians still debate the true effectiveness of vinegar in wound care during the Middle Ages. While its acidity could inhibit the growth of some bacteria, the unsterile application methods, the encouragement of pus, and the lack of understanding of systemic infection likely negated any benefits. Was it genuinely helpful in some cases, or was its perceived efficacy largely due to the placebo effect and the body's own healing capabilities? The answer is complex, but it's clear that the pain it inflicted was very real. Imagine the comparison between a medieval infirmary, dimly lit and filled with the groans of the wounded, and a modern operating room. The contrast is stark. It is a well-known historical fact that the average life expectancy in the Middle Ages was significantly lower than today, often only around 30-35 years, with high mortality rates due to injury and infection. A simple cut, which today might only require a quick cleaning and bandage, could result in excruciating pain, fever, gangrene, and eventually death. The fear of injury and its consequences was overwhelming, a constant shadow over everyday life. The psychological impact of this brutal treatment must have been immense. To endure such agony, knowing that it was intended for your own good, required an extraordinary level of fortitude and trust in the healer. The very act of applying the vinegar was a test of endurance, a ritual of suffering that was seen as a necessary step towards recovery. It's like going to the gym and pushing yourself to the point of pain, but without any guarantee of positive results, and with the added risk of making things worse. Today, you benefit from centuries of accumulated knowledge, from germ theory to advanced surgical techniques and sophisticated antibiotics. You understand that bacteria, invisible to the naked eye, are the real culprits behind infected wounds, not imbalances of humors or harmful gases. You believe in sterile environments, in evidence-based medicine, and in the power of antibiotics to combat infections that once ravaged populations. It's like upgrading from a crude stone tool to a laser-guided surgical instrument. The basic purpose is the same, but the technology and precision are light years apart. Despite the pain, vinegar remained a popular and widely used wound treatment throughout the Middle Ages. Its accessibility and affordability made it a go-to remedy for all social classes. For the common person, who couldn't afford complex herbal concoctions or the services of a skilled surgeon, vinegar was a readily available option, a desperate attempt to combat the ever-present threat of infection. The journey from pouring painful vinegar on an open wound to performing complex microsurgery is a testament to the relentless curiosity of humans and the power of scientific research. It was not a straight line, but a winding path filled with mistakes, dead ends, and brilliant breakthroughs. Each strange remedy, each erroneous theory was a piece of the puzzle, a step toward a more precise understanding of the human body and the world around us. So, as you drift deeper into your peaceful slumber, imagine the raw, searing sensation of vinegar on an open wound, and the desperate hope that lay behind such brutal applications. In the Middle Ages, healing was not a gentle process. It was a battle fought with blunt instruments and agonizing remedies. The sharp tang of vinegar, while a source of immense pain, was also a symbol of humanity's relentless, often misguided quest to conquer disease and survive in a world where every injury carried the specter of death. Now, a unique and little-known detail: did you know that even after the Middle Ages, all the way through the Renaissance and early modern times, the debate about merited pus and the best way to treat wounds continued to rage among surgeons? Some, like Ambroise Paré in the 16th century, famously challenged cauterization and promoted gentler wound care. But these new ideas were often met with strong opposition from traditionalists. It highlights how deeply ingrained these beliefs were, and how much effort was required to dispel them, even as more effective alternatives began to emerge. Now, let's broaden our perspective beyond the specific application of vinegar and explore the general cabinet of curiosities that constituted wound care and medicine in the Middle Ages. You're stepping into a world where the boundaries between healing, superstition, and even outright magic were often blurred, and where the search for effective remedies led to truly astonishing and often horrifying practices. The common wound was just one small ailment in a vast landscape of suffering, and the treatments for it often mirrored the general approach to all diseases, which brings us to a point of scholarly debate. Historians still argue about the exact moment or discovery that truly broke the dominance of humoral theory in wound care and paved the way for modern surgical practices. Was it anatomical revelations, practical innovations by military surgeons, or the eventual formulation of germ theory? Perhaps it was a complex interplay of many factors, a cumulative effect that slowly but surely transformed the understanding of medicine. Imagine a medieval infirmary not just filled with the groans of the injured, but with an array of strange ingredients and even stranger tools. A common historical fact is the widespread use of various poultices and plasters made from a bewildering variety of substances. These might include herbs, animal fats, honey, bread, or even spider webs. The belief was that these concoctions could draw out infection, reduce swelling, or promote healing. They were often applied warm, sometimes directly to the open wound, with little regard for sterility. It's like trying to fix a leaky pipe with a mixture of mud and leaves. You're trying, but it's probably not going to hold. Think of the shift in mentality. From a world where injuries and illnesses were often seen as punishment from God, or mystical imbalances, to one where they are understood as biological processes that can be accurately studied, diagnosed, and treated. This shift has not only extended human lifespans, but fundamentally changed our relationship to our bodies and the concept of health. You no longer live in constant fear of a simple cut. You live with the knowledge that many wounds can be healed. The story of medieval wound care, with its reliance on humors and its brutal use of vinegar, is more than a historical curiosity. It is a powerful reminder of the human condition, our vulnerability to injury, our desperate search for relief, and our incredible capacity to learn and adapt. It shows us that even in the darkest corners of ignorance, there is a heartfelt desire to heal, a deep human instinct to alleviate suffering. Beyond these topical applications, the internal world of humor still dictated much of the treatment for wounds. If a wound was inflamed and hot, Bloodletting might be performed to reduce the plethora of blood. If it was oozing pus, that laudable pus was often encouraged, sometimes even by applying irritants to the wound to promote further discharge. The goal was to restore the internal balance, even if the external wound looked increasingly gruesome. So, as the last whispers of the Middle Ages fade into the silence of your room, and you drift into a deep sleep, take with you the echoes of an age when healing was a brutal art, and where even the sour taste of vinegar symbolized a desperate yet enduring hope. Now, for a unique and lesser-known detail about medieval wound remedies, did you know that some healers would use sympathetic magic involving the actual weapon that caused the wound? For instance, instead of treating the wound directly, they might apply salves or ointments to the sword or knife that inflicted the injury, believing that by healing the weapon, the wound it caused would also heal. This was based on the idea that a magical connection existed between the instrument of injury and the injury itself. Imagine a knight carefully oiling his sword every day, not for maintenance, but to help his own battle wounds heal faster. It's a truly bizarre, yet fascinating example of their worldview. This leads us to a fascinating point of academic debate. Historians still debate the extent to which these more overtly magical or superstitious practices were genuinely believed by all practitioners, or if they were primarily folk remedies that coexisted with, and sometimes influenced, more formal medical approaches. Was it a sincere belief in supernatural forces, or a pragmatic attempt to offer hope and comfort when scientific understanding was lacking? The answer is likely a complex blend, reflecting the diverse intellectual landscape of the Middle Ages. The role of religious belief was also deeply intertwined with healing. Pilgrimages to holy sites, prayers, and the use of sacred relics were common historical facts in the pursuit of recovery from wounds. If a medical remedy failed, people often turned to divine intervention as their last hope. The body and soul were seen as intrinsically linked, and illness or injury was often interpreted through a spiritual lens, as a test or a punishment.